It is really my pleasure today to kick off the first main room panel and this wonderful group of people. We're focusing today on training and retraining with focus on labor force development. How do you inspire someone to take on the challenge of learning something new? What methods and strategies are best for long-term success and retention? How do you support a person to help them get to the next level? We know that especially in today's new post-COVID world, as we're all rebuilding our industry, labor force development is paramount in order for our industry to thrive and grow. But how do you actually accomplish that at your restaurant? And how do we as a collective community accomplish that in our industry? Luckily, Mike has assembled this wonderful group of people to give us some expert opinions on how to do just that. Starting all the way to the right, Marguerite Mariscal has spent much of her career journey with Momofuku, serving as social media manager, director of communications and design, chief of staff, creative director, and now CEO. In a 2019 New York Times article, Momofuku founder David Chang heaped praise upon his new CEO, saying she is the only person I've ever felt comfortable giving complete carte blanche to in terms of what Momofuku looks like and what it should be. Next we have, over closer to me in the blue, we have Elizabeth Tilton. Elizabeth is the founder of Oyster Sunday, an operating system for independent restaurants. She's based in New Orleans and New York City, and Oyster Sunday's mission is to reevaluate and reimagine the business infrastructure necessary to build stable, profitable businesses in the hospitality industry. Lynn House has an extensive career in the beverage industry. In 2019, she was named National Spirits Specialist and Portfolio Mixologist for Heaven Hill Brands. Prior to working at Heaven Hill Brands, Lynn served as Chief Mixologist at Blackbird Restaurant in Chicago. During her tenure at Blackbird, Lynn curated the spirit and beverage program for the Michelin Star and James Beard award-winning restaurant. Lastly, we have the very well-known Eric Williams, also of Chicago, owner and chef of Virtue Restaurant and Bar, Mustard Seed Kitchen, Daisy Po' Boy Tavern, and Top This Mac and Cheese. Let's give a round of applause for our panelists. Finally, today's moderator is Brett Anderson. Brett joined the food desk as a contributor in July 2019, after almost 20 years as the restaurant critic and features writer at the Times-Picayune in New Orleans. He has won 3 James Beard Awards, including Jonathan Gold Local Voice Award, has reported extensively on environmental and climate issues in and around New Orleans, and was named Eater's Reporter of the Year for his 2017 reporting on sexual harassment in the restaurant industry. And with that, I will turn it over to Brett and our panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So, you know, it was 3 years ago, roughly, almost exactly, that I started to get into a habit in my job. So I joined the Times not that long before the pandemic began, and I got into this habit. I'd never been a national reporter before. I'd always worked at local newspapers, and it's still something I struggle with, is how I'm supposed to write about Kansas City when I live in New Orleans. But I got into the habit of trying to have phone conversations with 4 or 5 people every week from different parts of the country that I'd never met before. And when I say people, I mean restaurateurs and chefs and people in the restaurant business, to help me sort of keep my ear to the ground, so to speak, about what was happening in this industry. You know, when the pandemic started, you know, that's all we talked about, obviously. And these conversations didn't always lead to stories. There were sort of information sessions, both for me and for the people on the other end of the line. I was looking back in preparation for this panel about I was sort of looking to the stories I'd written that have to do with staffing and with labor. And as it happens, basically everything I've written in the last 3 years has in some ways touched on the staffing challenges that restaurateurs have had for the last 3 years. The first story I wrote, or one of the first stories I wrote in the pandemic, was actually in New Orleans, and the people in New Orleans I spoke to in the restaurant business at the time, the takeaway was that the pandemic was more challenging than Hurricane Katrina. which is a sort of a sobering reminder of where we've been and how far we've come in the last 3 years. The challenges have been different for different people across the country. They haven't fit, restaurateurs in New Orleans and South Florida and South Dakota and New York City, have faced these challenges in different ways. But something that has been consistent with just about everyone I've talked to in the restaurant business over the last 3 years until very recently was that the hardest thing about operating today is finding staff and keeping staff. You see that from a diner's perspective, I think, when you travel all over the country still. You see it in sort of higher prices. You see it in shorter hours. Restaurateurs don't have the staff to be open in many cases as often as they used to be. I talked to restaurateurs who have not moved forward with expansion plans because they can't find the staff to operate properly. But I think something that has also happened that we're living through right now is something of a renaissance in the restaurant business. Because I think that as a result of these challenges, there's been a lot of creative and innovative thinking among owners and chefs and people in sort of management and decision-making positions in the business that has resulted in more people than ever who are working in the restaurant business that think of their work as a career. And I think that has been partly had something to do with owners trying to grapple with this idea of how do we keep people, right? And how do we keep the best people? How do we make them the best restaurant employees that they can be? Training is part of that. And I'd like to start with you, Eric. We've spoken about how the pandemic and the issues around staffing have impacted you as an owner. In Chicago right now, we're entering sort of a new season, right? It's good weather, right? Can you talk a little bit about how you have about 100 employees, right?
Yes.
And at this point, what's your biggest concern in terms of staffing right now as you look to be able to take advantage of the opportunity of this new season coming ahead?
Well, our biggest concern in terms of staffing has a lot to do with our ability to get people in that want to commit. Commitment is a huge part of what it takes to run an operation, and then being able to get them developed at a pace that's both comfortable for them and comfortable for the company. We want people to be a part of our culture, a part of our ethos, and obviously some things don't need to be instructed. But there are some things, some bumpers that we like to put up that allow people to integrate into our system and perform at a high level.
What is are there any systems you've done as far as training is concerned that are sort of new to you, and that help you get that commitment you need from staff and from new staff in particular?
No, we use a system that we've used for many years before I was an owner, and it has to do with building team and community within the space. And that offers us the greatest opportunity to both have someone integrate and embrace the goal of hospitality. I spoke quite a bit about this yesterday, and the idea is there's been a major shift in our industry where we're finally starting to identify that we don't just need to extend hospitality to our guests, but we need to extend it to one another. And, we were fortunate in the idea that we've been doing that for some time. But we're happy to hear that more restaurants are embracing that philosophy. For us, the really critical component is, I think, had we not had the type of retreat from restaurants, partly due to bad publicity around the idea that the hospitality community was failing in some sort. We were definitely making mistakes, but I think it's pretty grave to say that we were failing. What we started to do, naturally, we would have, we have a nice restaurant, but we probably would have opened a finer restaurant so that we could buy more toys, more bells and whistles, and attract, a different kind of chef per se. But we decided to go the opposite route, and we opened simpler restaurants that needed less technical skills so that we could create a wider net for talent. And now we've created essentially our own farm.
Marguerite, when we talked before coming to Philadelphia, you told me that you thought that Momofuku was sort of in a better position today than it was even a couple of years before the pandemic, both financially and in terms of staffing. And you guys did a lot of sort of self-analysis, it sort of sounds like, about about retention in particular for staff. Can you talk a little bit about what you learned when you sort of looked at the numbers and decided to grapple with that particular issue?
Sure. So completely agree with everything you're saying. Like, I think we very much, I think people don't think about the cost of hiring as like a true line item on a P&L to replace someone who leaves, whether it's the job postings, it's OT, it's, your management stepping in and working a station. Like, there's so much cost about someone leaving. And that I think we really have spent, so we have fewer employees. We have about 500 employees now. Pre-pandemic, we had over 1,000, but we're spending more money per employee than we ever have, because we're basically betting on putting the dollars towards retention as opposed to putting dollars towards recruitment. And, best case scenario, as you laid out, is having your own ability to move people up within the organization. So we really tried to, Dave and I talk about like Moneyball, and like, how can you look at restaurants in terms of stats, right? Like, what's your retention rate? How many people are on your benefits? Like, we started doing semi-annual employee surveys that are anonymous. And so we're actually getting data back as to, are people happy with compensation versus the market? Are people happy with benefits versus the market? And we can actually look at that, every 6 months and say, what changes can we make to then look back at this and see if it's getting better? And so really trying to look at it. I mean, it's obviously hospitality is the most like human thing in the world, and that's never going to go away. But how can you kind of balance that with hard numbers that you can really judge, how are you getting better? Are you getting more responsive to what people are looking for? And so that's been a big initiative for us. And the pandemic, I would say, was really the reset of, I feel like everyone always says this, but it's like hospitality was trying to fix a moving car. And I really think staffing was worse in like 2019 in a lot of ways, in that you were just trying to build, get people in, and there wasn't necessarily the ecosystem, the systems that you need to actually keep and retain those people. And so I think for us, it was really a moment like, there was actually the time for me to read our entire employee handbook and then, go back and fix it, or not fix it, but just evolve it. Right. And so I think that kind of time and like looking at everything and saying, why is this way? Can we do it a little different? Can we add this? Can we move that? I think has made a big difference in our ability to retain staff.
Well, can you talk? You had mentioned that there, and correct me if I'm remembering this wrong, but like about an onward and upward initiative that you had.
Yeah.
Can you explain
Sure.
a little bit what that means?
So it's like an internal initiative, just to like, how can we just keep making everything more responsive to what people want? So we reshaped all of our benefits, I would say, in 2021 to be oriented around retention. So things like, if you're an hourly employee, for every year you work for us, you get more PTO days. So we're, if someone's going to get $1 more elsewhere, they're more likely to come to us and say, hey, I'm going to get $1 more elsewhere, but I don't want to leave because I've stacked up all these benefits. Can we meet somewhere, right? And so we want to create more of those conversations. So that's one piece. Just looking at things like bereavement policies and like, does it include miscarriages? Does it include grandparents? Like, what are the things that matter to people? And they're little things, right? But I think they do have a lot of weight. And so we started doing sabbaticals, which we informally did for staff. We're really lucky to have staff that have been with us for 5-10 years that are getting very obviously burnt out. I've been with the company for 12 years. Maybe I'll take a sabbatical. We'll see. But for us, it's like, how do we formalize these things? And so basically these surveys are a way for us to kind of reflect, look back and then keep just trying to like tweak the offerings to be more in line with what people are looking for. So, and it's never, and like, we're not perfect. We're never going to be done doing it. And what I tell our HR team is like, all people want to see is like response, right? So it's like, it's never good. We're not, could healthcare always be cheaper and more accessible? Of course. Like, could we always offer more benefits? Of course. I think we just need to show the team that they're asking and we're attempting to meet them. And if we can keep doing that, then like that's progress as opposed to, Google, masseuses, all of that. Like, it's really like, how can we like just keep inching towards what the ideal is?
What, Elizabeth, you did, you described Oyster Sunday to me as in some ways, a sort of like the corporate office for your clients, right? For smaller restaurants and independent restaurants. And you guys started like a minute before the pandemic, right? I mean, in the fall of 2019. Can you tell me a little bit about how you, or tell the group here, about how you counsel your clients where it comes to training in particular, and like, how do you explain to someone why that's important, who's sort of new to the business, or maybe doesn't even have that many employees and so doesn't think that much about like about that aspect of the business?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I actually was at Momofuku when we knew that each other then, but really inspired what Oyster Sunday is. And we say it stands for operating system. But we have everything from financial analytics, operations, HR, branding, and marketing, because we really do think the entire ecosystem needs to be considered on every touch point we make and try to inform our operators and who we work with. And so what we do from that standpoint is that every operator has a difference. We always ask, like, what at the end of the day for you is success? Is it taking care of your team? Is it opening 17 restaurants? Because at that point, we need to like go towards that and like help to inform where they're trying to build their business. Because everything, like the foundation's the same, but every little touch point's a little bit more unique. But we always start with saying, we ask that question. Then we say, okay, you want to do 17 different benefits. You're one brick and mortar, 15 people. Let's run the numbers. Let's, like exactly what Marguerite's saying, like, let's actually look at your financials and say, is this going to be viable to not only help support people, but to like maintain your business? And then we say, okay, if not, let's tier it out. Let's make these things accessible, but based off and also always say, like, let's survey your team. We do a lot of surveying, kind of internal analysis before even putting the things forward, because a lot of time operators think there's certain things that people need, but at the end of the day, it's around pay, it's around location, transportation, it's around like consistent schedule, understanding how and which to spend your time. Because at the end, in the midst of the pandemic, everyone was asking themselves that like your health and your compensation were completely at odds. And we had to ask ourselves, like, why? Like, why are we doing this? Why does it matter? And so now I think we're distilling those decision makings through the entire ecosystem of a restaurant. And having to sit there and say, in training, you have your HR compliance, but you have your training manuals, and it needs not only to lead with your opening and closing checklist, but it needs to lead with what are your culture, what are your values, how is that disseminating through every decision you're making? And because a lot of people want to know, like, okay, I can clean this and do this thing, but like, why does it matter? What are the touch points? Why am I responsible? And how does it impact everyone around me? And I think the more there's this kind of team mentality of understanding that, then we can disseminate that and have people feel empowered to like make decisions and to like know the parameters they have to operate within, to then know where they have flexibility of decision making. And I think that agency is unbelievably empowering for people, because at the end of the day, no one wants to fail, right? I mean, everyone wants to be successful, and we need, as operators, we're responsible for like giving them skills to do that. And it takes time and it takes money, but it's so important, because to your point, Marguerite, like cutting your team in half and, or not, I shouldn't say cutting, I'm sorry, that's not the right word, but like, reevaluating team structures. It's like you have to then think about every individual very, very, like all the feedback, all the mentorship that comes with that. And it's an upfront cost that takes a lot of time, but it's worth its weight.
How do you explain to someone who's early in the process of working with you that it's worth it, this investment that they maybe weren't thinking of making before they started talking to you? Yeah,
I mean, sometimes every operator is a little different, but I do find that the operators that are coming to work with us and are reaching out are looking for it, right? And there's certain times where during COVID, there was like it was about HR, and then it was about financing, and then it was about digital marketing. And like there's these waves, and right now it is training, HR, compliance is like, it's coming in at a very quick clip. And so we're seeing it at a national level. Where can we meet you for your operation? So we do a lot of that. It could be iterative. Like we can say, here's phase 1, and then let's think about phase 2 in the future. But make sure that it makes sense for their business. But it's a great question. I think there's not one size fits all for sure.
Lynn, you've had a really interesting and long career in hospitality, and sort of varied. You know, like you worked for Houston's group. You've worked for these big corporations, Let Us Entertain You, and also like Paul Kahan's group and Spring. Can you tell us a little bit about? You told me earlier in your career about your sort of formative experiences as a manager who trained employees at Houston's. I think that's fascinating. Can you just explain a little bit about that first management job and sort of how that company went about things, and a little bit about how that's informed the way you do your work?
Absolutely. So Houston's, if anybody knows this group, Houston's Hillstones, I always describe it as the Marine Corps of the restaurant industry. Like, it's not the Army, it's not the Navy. You are definitely like the Green Beret SEAL in that. With the training program, it was very, very intense. But the thing that was really formative about that, it's a pure teamwork system. There's no barback, there's no busser, there's no food runner as a server, and then there's the kitchen, and it's all full team. And so the success of each individual restaurant is that team has to be successful. So it's a very intensive training program that you go through. It was like 10 days before you could even get on the floor. You're constantly evaluated. You also had a mentor that was assigned to you that you checked in with for the first 3 months. And they would give feedback as to what you needed to improve on, any questions. And so I think that mentorship was really, really important. And it's huge emphasis also on education, and it was mandatory education, whether it was wine, whether it was food, whether it was a new dish, it was, a new POS system, so that anybody who was interacting in some way with a customer, was at the same playing field. And because it was also this really kind of intense thing, the weakest person, it was up to us to lift the weakest person, because if, you're only as strong as the weakest member on your team. And so there was a lot of camaraderie there. And that's something that's just really carried through. We saw that model in Let Us Entertain You as well. And then when I worked with One Off Hospitality with Paul, very much that same system, even though that each restaurant was its own kind of, individual snowflake, the consistency that was insisted in the training, front and back, everyone, we trained together, we worked together, we ate together, we communed together. It was all about building this culture that supported everyone. And I think with all those organizations, you can see that's where that long-term success came from.
And in the work that you do now, can you talk a little bit about it? but also, I think it's interesting how you, as someone who's not a restaurant owner and doesn't can actually bring this extra added benefit to your clients by helping make better barkeeps and
Absolutely.
servers.
So now I'm on the liquid side of things, and I work nationally for Heaven Hill. So I always tell people my territory is America. So I see lots of different markets. I'm on the road about 38 weeks out of the year. And even though I work for a brand, something that we're seeing a lot of the brands do, particularly people in my line of the work, is a focus on education. So not just coming in and, doing my Pana commercial. We're adding extra value. So things that I do when I travel the country, because it is a skill set, there is a huge gap right now in skill set on the liquid side of things. We lost a lot of people, again, to things that you're saying, healthcare, work-life balance, all of that. It kind of exposed a big light, diversity, equity, and inclusion, dealing with misogyny in the beverage industry. So collectively, what we're seeing, and what I do a lot is, workshops that I take out, running a cost-effective but creative beverage menu. So working with our customers, teaching them, again, I have found that I've had to go back to 101 trainings with a lot of restaurant groups that I work with, because they have so many new people coming in. And then a lot of organizations, I've also done, you're seeing a lot of brands do mentorship programs, cross-country mentorship. So I just finished with Speed Rack, where it was 88 people, women, mentoring 88 women across the country. There's another one with another rally that I worked with, where it was 10 brand ambassadors, mentored 10 women. There are some groups in California that are just bar directors and beverage managers realizing this huge gap that brands are working with and coming in and just creating, so that it's building up a community, you know, because right now that gap is there, and there we're a little nervous. You know, we worked so hard to gain, you know, integrity about the beverage industry and not just be like, you know, the bar keeps slinging and pining, and to really bring craft into it. And so collectively as an industry, we're working really hard to train everyone and retrain everyone and bring the new ones up to speed to keep that level there.
What, Eric, can you comment a little bit about, you know, you're growing, right? You've got a relatively new restaurant in Daisy's, right? And you'd like to have more, right? I mean, we've talked about that. How, like, is the fact that you're growing an enticement to potential employees in the sense that, like, you know, if you come work here, look, there's opportunities to do different things here. Is that an important part of your sort of staffing, I don't know, the way to lure talent?
Well, it's definitely an important piece of the staffing matrix.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if the talent necessarily knows sometimes why they take a job. And I say that because I'm recognizing more and more each day that for many people, their place of operation, place of work, the place where they extend their talent happens to be the most stable place that they spend their time. And so what we offer is a sense of stability and structure. And operators shun that idea. The old school operators believe, you know, like there should be some work-life separation, leave your problems at home. And what we're seeing is a lot of pushback because if you left home early, you don't want to talk to your parents. You probably don't have allies, so to speak, in your family. Many of us come from relationships that are broken or torn, so we have no sense of commitment, right? And so allow us a place where we can explore the possibility of having community, having structure, knowing that we can rely on a thing other than a check. Rely on a thing to happen if we perform or produce a certain way. And so what we really make a really intentional attempt to do is provide that high level of stability and structure, and then sky's the limit to what talent will produce, but also attract. And so many of the people that we're seeing now are attracted through people that they already know.
Can I add to that? Yeah. So in this survey that we did, I think we had about 50% respond, which we're trying to get up to closer to 60 for next time. But I think it was so interesting to like what people responded to. So so we did this, and you know, once again, always work to do, not perfect by any means, not representative of the whole. But I think we had like 92% say that they would recommend Momofuku to a friend, and that is like that's how you get more and more people in. But I thought the question that I actually thought, to Eric's point, that I think is like the most interesting is I think close to 100% said they felt like they were involved in decisions that impacted their work. And I think that ability to feel as if they're like, you know, they're a part of this, and that, you know, their trajectory, their home, all that, like that to me is such a defining piece of the difference, I would say, also between maybe old school chef systems where it was all top down directed, you know, this is what it is, but to feel as if they're part of, you know, the why, as Elizabeth was saying, part of the organization, part of this whole, I think is the changing piece that really, you know, is the future. And I think we do these orientations every month, and we ask people their least favorite condiment and why they worked here. Like, why did they say yes? And it's great because the questions you get are pretty, you know, all over the place. But what I've been noticing is the number of people who say, I feel like I'm treated like a person and not treated as my job. And that is like, if we can get people to start feeling that way, that's how people are going to stay. And so that being the answer, I mean, don't get me wrong, other people are like $25 an hour. I don't know, like it's not one size fits all, but I think it's just, you know, the more people are humanized, the more I think you get that retention, the more that you get people staying.
What what's a popular? What's like? I'm curious on the condiment question. Like, what do people hate? Like, as far as condiments go, what?
I mean, it's like, your ketchups, your mayos, I think there's like some
hate
strong opinions there. I don't know. It's a good camaraderie moment for people.
What is? I wanted to turn it. Is there to see if anyone has questions in the room? And if you do, you could, I think, raise your hand. Alon.
I had a question for Lynn about the training at Hillstone.
Hey, can you hang on? So.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I had a question about the structure of the training. You said that people would spend 10 days training before they even ended up on the floor. How was that managed? And can you go into a little bit more detail about that? Because, when you have someone starting on Tuesday and then someone starting on Friday and then someone starting on the following Thursday, and is there a specific trainer that just spends full time working with those people, going through everything, or are they trained kind of on the floor in the middle of all the action? Any more detail on that would be great.
So as I said, the Marine Corps. But going back to your point of also lifting up Marguerite people, it was actually servers. We were the ones who were trainers, and it wasn't. If the Houston's model, you're ranked just like the military, and so to be a trainer, you had to be in the top 10. So we also got more per hour. We got better. We got paid out. We went through extensive training ourselves. And what you had was we had training classes. So we hired in groups. And so it would be a group of 5 to 10 usually, orientation, walkthrough. And then there were within those other top 10 servers, you would have a day and you would know this person's on day 1. And there was an expectation of what was to cover on day 1 and what parts of the restaurant they were to work. And you pair them with different on day 2. And then there was also testing after each. And if you didn't pass your test, that was the requirements for day 1. You had to repeat day 1. And then when you went to day 2, if you had to, all the way up to the end, and then it was 85%. So if you didn't have that 85% of that full test of the week, and that was everything with systems, hospitality, preparations, ingredients. Like I said, you had to know everything that was being touched. And I always say that I know makes a lot more money than I don't know. And so that has carried me through everything that I do. But that was that system. And if you didn't pass, you had to go through that entire training. So it was weeding out the people who, just weren't going to make it, because we probably lost 30% of the people, but it was also keeping people who were, when you say commitment, who were committed to this process. They knew they were going to make good money. They knew the teamwork. They knew the environment. They understood the culture that they were walking into. I just think I know we were talking, Elizabeth, that a lot of restaurants look to that model. What are they doing? And there's a lot of restaurants like the Capital Grill Group came out of that. Firebird came out of that group. Boston Market came out of that group. It makes sense. It makes sense to me. And so I try to bring that skill set even into what I'm doing, with a level of excellence that I expect when I'm doing trainings and talking and going back and making sure that the weakest person is not left behind.
Is there anyone else who'd like to ask a question?
Does that still work today?
Can you pass the mic phone? Sorry.
Does that still work today? I mean, that whole program, are they still following those types of?
If you go to any Houston's Hillstone across the country, you will notice probably the most consistent service ever. So yes, they are still, I've got several friends who've progressed up through that and worked through that. They are still following that model no matter where you are. That consistency is so important. That consistency is also not about retaining staff, it's about retaining customers. And so the original model for Houston's Hillstones, George Beal, who was the owner creator, loved NBA basketball. So all the original Houstons were where there were NBA basketball teams. And he intentionally courted them so that they knew when they were on the road, they would have a great meal. Because I work the road. It kind of sucks when you go somewhere and you're like, oh, that's my meal for the night. But they knew that when they were on the road, they could have a consistent meal, great service. And then it also attracted a lot of those players in. And so consumers came in, they're like, Michael Jordan's eating here, I'm going to eat here, so-and-so's eating here. So it was a really genius model of what they did. And of course, they've built out into other markets from that. But that was that whole thing. But I know every single person who eats it when they're like, it doesn't matter if I'm in New Orleans, if I was at the one in Chicago, if I'm in the one in New York, it's a consistent experience. And so that's definitely part of their model still.
Is there other question in the audience? There's some back here.
My question was for Chef Eric. My question is, how do you find the balance, but being a chef and still trying to create that kitchen environment, but as well as still trying to obtain the goals that you're trying to reach? And do you also feel as though you have to have, do you feel as though you have to have a sort of like a team prior to that to still push the goals that you want set that you can't do by yourself?
I think there was like 3 questions, but
Sorry.
I'm gonna go for it. So, balance is an interesting question in itself, because when people think balance, they think like a tightrope, right? So we think even, 50-50. And balance is nowhere near that. What I try to do is find the happy medium that works for both me and the team. So there are times when I want to be more involved, and I have to restrain myself because more involvement from me means less involvement from someone else. So I try to find creative ways to be involved and participate. And sometimes that's more these days in a coaching capacity, where I watch a lot of the service and I pay attention to how people are doing things. I do more check-ins now than I've done in my entire life. I reap the benefit of the relationship that I have with our core team, and that relationship allows me a lot more capacity. So people are willing to take on more tasks, and I'm able to extend their ambitions and extend my own ambitions based through my own experience. So to really break that down really quickly, someone says they want to open a restaurant, I can start looking for spaces based on their skill set. And I can think about within the team how we can build a team around that person. I can think about what those needs are. And then we can start to have conversations about what it's going to take for them to achieve that goal in real time. I, as a chef many years ago, my chef de cuisine is actually sitting in the room. We decided to do something that was a little weird in those days. And instead of doing exit interviews with the kitchen, we would do exit tastings, because we knew that we had guys that wanted to leave that weren't ready. And we wanted them to see in real time what it was going to take for them to get the job they wanted to have. And we would do this with good notice. And they would have to produce food that could go on our menu before they left, so that their tastings were tight, because at the end of the day, they represent our brand. And we weren't going to have guys leaving and being on the street saying they worked with us for 2 years and they can't cook.
That's awesome. No.
I think there was another hand. Is Ashley?
No.
I think we have time for 2.
All right, my question is for Marguerite. So in terms of retention of long-term employees, what advice or systems in place do you have for burnout besides sabbaticals?
Yeah, totally. I think so. Sabbaticals are like, obviously that's like leadership. That's every 5-10 years, right? So that's not the solution. So I would say on a more daily basis, I would say, I think so a piece of feedback we got was, great, you have, high PTO days per the market, but do people feel as if they actually can take them? And that answer was like one of our like lowest answers when we did this survey. And so we always talk about like, it's so, you could say you do this and you have this, but like if the team can't actually take advantage of it, then like it doesn't matter. And so it's been a really big effort, I would say. And I just take a step back. I really think something we think about all the time is like, we're big and we're never not going to be big. So how do you use being big as an advantage, not a disadvantage? Because obviously as you get bigger, you're a little less nimble, you're a little less able to kind of operate the way that you were 5 years ago. So we try to take advantage of the fact that like we do have a operations lead. We do have a culinary team that, they work on new projects, they work on things. But what we've started to do is really like if someone needs to take PTO, how are we going to accommodate them doing that? And so it's really like a team effort. So we'll have, for example, we have 2 noodle bars in New York. If someone needs to go out, we'll move people from one to the other to make sure that there's coverage. Or we'll have someone from our team go out to LA and basically work at the restaurant for the week that they're out. And so it's really, I think, about like communication and making sure people can actually take advantage of those things. Other things that we're trying to do in addition to just PTO, I think, we're doing a lot of training around, we're doing this thing called Managers Essentials. So Dave and I both have done executive coaching, which has been extraordinarily helpful for me. And so we tapped someone to basically do a version of that for our managers. And so I think a lot of it's also just like, how do you manage stress, right? How do you manage the day-to-day of your job? How do you communicate? And I think that from a burnout standpoint is as important, I think, as taking a day off. And so we're working with our teams to try to create just kind of like better habits, right? Or how do you process stress? How do you have a difficult conversation? How do you make your day-to-day a little less draining? And so that has been, I think, really, really great. And so there was a question you had, I think, of just kind of like, what kind of training do you do? What kind of things? And I think for me, it's, how do you make your day-to-day a little easier and a little less stressful, I think has almost more impact, I would say, than actually taking one day off. So that's something else that we're working on to try to, keep people here longer.
Ashley, can you do a 2-minute one?
Thanks for everything you all shared and for sharing your playbooks with us. Kind of like if we're thinking of PTO and healthcare bereavement as like baseline benefits, what are like Eric, what you shared yesterday? I loved the having encouragement and resources available for home ownership, that sort of thing. What are the next level benefits, Marguerite, specifically since you have the feedback loop with your team? As leaders, we're trying to think of like, what do we work on, put energy into, time, invest in that is meaningful to people? Like, for example, 401k or people, what kind of response do you see to things like that? Is there a great example of something that is what is next beyond those baseline benefits?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it truly is also just a mix of like, who is your workforce, right? So we have a 401k, but that I think resonates with maybe executive chefs, that resonates with the home office. I don't know. And we try to do a lot of education around, what, like, do this, it's free money, like do it. But it's not the easiest thing to get everyone through the door. I would say healthcare is really interesting because yes, it's baseline, but actually making it accessible on a dollar basis if you're an hourly employee is really hard. And I think, we have a goal of increasing the percentage of our workforce that's actually on our healthcare. And so that to me is something we're really focusing on right now, which is like, you can have all these benefits and it's great, but how do you actually make it at a price point in which people can hop on? Things like, I feel like Elizabeth has some good things here, but like FSAs and things like that, I think it's something we're like preaching once again, like, this is, something that's for your benefit and something we can offer. So I would say that's some of it. I really do think professional development is a huge piece. And I think that's something where we haven't completely cracked. And it sounds like everyone on the stage is probably better at that than me right now. But I think the ability to truly train up employees and have them feel like they're leaving, and whether that's certification. We have reimbursements for like wine certification for anyone that works for us, whether you're a chef, server, et cetera. But I think the more upskilling, in my mind, as a benefit, is like the next frontier. I think we're still figuring out how to do that.
Yeah, and I think just to jump in here real quick, we, even thinking about healthcare as being the baseline, it's like 32% of independent hospitality operators offer it, and let alone like how much they contribute These are from like Labor Bureau, and it's an unbelievable small percentage. And then it's like underinsured, uninsured. And so the next layer is like, what does the reimbursement look like? What do things like catastrophic insurance mixed with telemedicine's changing? And we built OS Benefits, which is a dashboard that connects operators. We do a beta. It's in beta right now. We're launching in June. We have 2,200 people on it. And like the amount of people that are going for dental coverage is like, it's so many. And it's like, you can tell that even people in these industries still need access, and we need to kind of bridge that gap. And 401ks are becoming required in some states like California and Oregon. Like, so if you don't have retirement plans, you have to have some sort of coverage. So we saw a huge increase in people going to Betterment for our clients in California to find coverage, or else they had to go to the state coverage. So it's all changing right now, and Maryland's making it easier to opt into for benefits on your tax return. So I think we're in a really interesting time, and just keeping the ear to the ground as where you do operate to see what's happening. It's going to be changing a lot in the next 5 years. But I think next is again, training and development.
I think we could talk all morning, but we can't. We're getting the hook. You guys, thank you so much for sharing yourselves with the group. Thanks for the questions.